The rain in Portland, Oregon, had been falling since Thursday, and by Saturday morning it had settled into the kind of gray, persistent drizzle that made the whole city feel like it was holding its breath. Colton Ferris, 43, stood behind the glass counter of his watch repair shop on SC Division Street and listened to the rain tap against the front window. The shop was called Ferris & Son Timepieces, though the son part 8-year-old Benji was currently sitting at the small desk in the back corner, drawing something with color brushes that he kept very serious and very private. Colton had learned not to ask about the drawings until Benji was ready to show them. Some things couldn't be rushed. The shop itself was exactly what it looked like from the outside. Small, worn at the edges, honest. The display cases held watches in various states of completion. The walls were lined with clocks, each one ticking at its own pace, filling the room with a quiet, layered rhythm that Colton had stopped consciously hearing years ago. The same way people who live near train tracks eventually stop hearing the trains. There was a magnifying lamp on the main workbench, a stool with a cracked leather cushion that he kept meaning to replace, and a framed photograph of his late wife, Sandra, hung near the door where the light hit it right in the mornings. It was not the life he had imagined for himself at 25, when he was finishing his final year at the horology program in Geneva, designing escapement mechanisms for a Swiss manufacturer whose name appeared on the back of watches that cost more than most people's cars. But Sandra had gotten sick, and then she had gotten better. And then she had gotten sick again, and by the time Benji was 3 years old, Colton had traded the clean white precision of a Swiss works for a small shop on a rainy street in Portland, because Sandra had wanted to be close to her mother, and because Colton had wanted to be close to Sandra, and then Sandra was gone, and here he still was. He was adjusting the balance wheel of a 1962 Omega Seamaster when the bell above the door rang. The woman who walked in did not look like someone who had wandered in off the street. She looked like someone who had arrived at the wrong address and was already composing a complaint about it. Her coat was charcoal cashmere. Her boots were Italian leather, and her hair was pulled back in a way that suggested a professional had been involved. She was somewhere in her mid-40s, though she carried herself with the particular tension of someone who had decided that age was something that happened to other people. Her name was Diana Whitmore, and she was the regional director of acquisitions for a commercial real estate firm headquartered in San Francisco. She was in Portland for the weekend to close a deal that would put $38 million through her hands by Monday morning. She was also, at this exact moment, holding a watch that was not working. She stepped aside and looked around the shop the way someone looks around a room when they are trying to decide whether to stay or leave. Her eyes moved over the worn display cases, the clocks on the walls, the child at the desk in the back. Something in her expression settled into a careful neutrality that was, in its own way, less kind than open disdain. "Is this a watch repair shop?" she asked. The question was technically genuine, but the tone suggested she already knew the answer and was disappointed by it. "It is," Colton said. He set down his tools and looked up without moving from his stool. "I need this repaired." She placed the watch on the counter. It was a Patek Philippe perpetual calendar chronograph, reference 5270, in platinum. The kind of watch that required a waiting list, a relationship with the dealer, and the willingness to spend somewhere north of $150,000. It sat on the glass counter of Colton's shop, like a small, expensive statement. Colton looked at it without touching it. Then he looked at Diana Whitmore. "When did it stop?" he asked. "This morning. I wound it last night. It was fine. I woke up and it was showing the wrong date, the subdials are stuck, and the minute hand isn't advancing." She paused. "I have a signing on Monday morning. I need to wear this watch. I always wear this watch when I close a deal. It's—" She stopped herself, as if she had been about to say something she considered too personal. "It matters." Colton nodded slowly. He pulled on his loop, picked up the watch, and turned it over. The caseback was exhibition, which meant the movement was visible through the sapphire glass. He looked at it for a long moment without speaking. Diana Whitmore shifted her weight. People who were used to commanding rooms were rarely comfortable with silence from other people. "Can you fix it?" she asked. "I can look at it properly," Colton said. "Give me a few minutes." "I don't really have a few minutes. I have a lunch at noon and a site visit at 3. Is there somewhere in this city that specializes in?" She looked around the shop again. "In high-end timepieces specifically?" Colton placed the watch back on the counter. His voice was even. "You're welcome to call around," he said. "There's a jeweler on NW 23rd that handles some service work, but they'll tell you anything this complicated goes to their regional partner in Seattle, which means 2 weeks minimum. There's a Patek authorized dealer in Bellevue, but that's a 2-hour drive each way on a Saturday, and their service queue is about 3 months out for a movement this involved." He paused. "Or you can leave it with me, and I'll tell you what I find in about 20 minutes. Diana Whitmore looked at him. Then she looked at the shop again, doing the calculation that people like her were always doing, the one where they weighed what a place looked like against what it could actually deliver, and almost always chose the appearance. "You're telling me you can diagnose a Patek Philippe perpetual calendar in 20 minutes, she said. It was not quite a question. "I'm telling you I can look at it and know what's wrong in 20 minutes, Colton said. "Whether I can fix it by Monday is a different conversation." Something in her expression shifted, not softened, exactly, but recalibrated. She looked at the watch on the counter. She looked at Colton. She looked at the shop, the clocks, the framed photograph by the door, the child in the back who had looked up briefly from his drawing, and then looked back down, apparently unimpressed by the whole situation. 20 minutes, she said. "Sit if you want." Colton nodded toward the chair near the window. "Or don't. Up to you." She did not sit. She stood near the door and looked at her phone while Colton carried the watch to his workbench, positioned it under the magnifying lamp, and began. He worked in silence. Not because he was performing concentration, but because the work required it. A Patek Philippe perpetual calendar chronograph is one of the most mechanically complex watch movements produced for commercial sale. The perpetual calendar complication alone involves a series of cams and levers that track not only the day and date but the month and leap year cycle, adjusted automatically so that the calendar never needs manual correction, except once every 4 years. The chronograph adds another layer, a column wheel mechanism, a lateral clutch, a vertical coupling system in the higher-end references. Colton had been inside movements like this dozens of times. He had consulted on the design language of a related caliber in 2003, a fact that appeared in exactly 0 places inside this shop and that he had never mentioned to a single customer. From the back corner, Benji watched his father work the way he always did, quietly, without appearing to watch. He had learned that watching too openly made his dad self-conscious, which made the work slower. So he had developed a technique of looking at his drawing while actually paying attention to the sounds. The sounds of his dad working were among his favorite in the world. The tiny metallic clicks, the occasional soft exhale. The way silence itself seemed to arrange itself differently around his father, when he was focused. Benji was drawing a dog. It was a very specific dog, a beagle named Pinto, who belonged to their neighbor Mrs. Callahan, and who had the habit of sitting in front of their shop door on weekend mornings. He was trying to get Pinto's ears right. The ears were harder than they looked. "Found it," Colton said, to no one in particular. Diana Whitmore looked up from her phone. "The chronograph reset lever is fouling against the perpetual calendar cam on the date side," Colton said, not looking up. "When you wound it last night, you probably pressed the crown in slightly more than usual, or it happened in your sleep if you wear it to bed. It caused a microshift in the reset lever position that's just enough to create drag. The calendar froze because the mechanism couldn't advance cleanly past midnight. It's not damaged. The lever just needs to be reset and the banking pin adjusted." Silence. "Is that..." Diana Whitmore paused. "Is that something you can actually fix?" "I'm going to fix it now," Colton said. "Assuming you have about 45 minutes. She stared at him. You can fix a perpetual calendar in 45 minutes. I can fix this specific problem in 45 minutes, he said. A full service would take longer. This is a reset and adjustment. I've done it before. There was a pause in which Diana Whitmore seemed to be deciding something. All right, she said. And then, almost despite herself, where did you learn to do this? Colton was already back at the bench, the movement partially disassembled under his lamp. Geneva, mostly, he said, and about 20 years of doing it every day. She sat down, not because she had decided to trust him, exactly, not yet, but because something in the precision of his diagnosis, the economy of his explanation, the complete absence of performance in the way he worked, something in all of that had rearranged her initial assessment. She sat in the chair near the window and watched the rain, and tried to remember the last time she had been somewhere that moved at this particular speed. Slow and certain, unhurried in a way that felt deliberate rather than lazy. From the back corner, Benji quietly put down his pencil and watched his father work, not hiding it this time, just watching. The clocks on the walls ticked. Colton worked through the disassembly, with the particular patience of someone for whom patience was not a virtue cultivated through effort, but simply the natural operating condition of his hands. He had learned, early in his training, that impatience was the enemy of fine mechanics, not because it made you careless, necessarily, but because it made you push, and fine mechanisms could not be pushed. They could only be understood, and then guided. The difference between pushing and guiding was the difference between a watch that worked for another decade and one that didn't. Sandra used to say that he brought this quality home with him, that he was the only person she had ever known who could wait out a silence without filling it, who could sit with uncertainty without needing to resolve it immediately. She had meant it as a compliment. He had taken it as one. He thought about Sandra sometimes while he worked. Not with the raw, breathless grief of the first years, but with something quieter, a kind of ongoing conversation that he held in some interior room, updating her on things, asking her opinion, telling her about Benji's drawings and Mrs. Callahan's beagle, and the small daily movements of a life she would have found, he thought, genuinely interesting. The reset lever yielded. He adjusted the banking pin. He cleaned the surfaces with a pegwood stick, checked the engagement under the loop, reassembled the date mechanism, wound the movement carefully, and watched the calendar advance through midnight times in quick succession without hesitation or drag. He set the time. He set the date. He set the moon phase, which had also drifted slightly. Though Diana Whitmore hadn't mentioned it, probably hadn't noticed. He carried the watch back to the counter. Done, he said. Diana Whitmore stood up from the chair with the particular speed of someone who had spent 45 minutes performing patience and was grateful to stop. She came to the counter and looked at the watch. The subdials were all correct. The date showed Saturday. The minute hand moved smoothly through its arc. The moon phase indicator showed a waxing gibbous, which was, in fact, correct. She turned the watch over in her hands. She looked at it for a long moment. She stopped. That's exactly right. The moon phase was off too, Colt said. I corrected it while I was in there. She looked up at him. There was something in her expression that hadn't been there before. Not yet gratitude, but the precursor to it. A kind of reconsideration. You corrected something I didn't even ask about, she said. It needed it, he said simply. She put the watch on her wrist and fastened the clasp. She looked at it against her skin the way people look at something they've been afraid of losing, with relief so specific it's almost indistinguishable from love. How much? She asked. Colton told her. It was a fair number. Not a small number, but fair. She nodded and reached for her bag. She paid without negotiation, which surprised him slightly, because in his experience people were watches that cost what her watch cost almost always negotiated. As if the money itself were secondary and the negotiation were the point. She picked up her bag. She turned toward the door, and then she turned back. I said something when I came in, she said, when I was looking around. I didn't say it out loud, but I thought it. She paused. I assumed that this place couldn't. She stopped again, And for the first time since she'd walked in, her composure shifted into something less certain, more genuine. I was wrong, I do that sometimes. I'm aware that I do it. I'm not sure why I'm telling you this. Colton looked at her for a moment. Probably because you're good at closing deals, he said. And you know when something needs to be said before you can move forward. Diana Whitmore smiled. It was a small smile, the kind that arrives without permission. Maybe, she said. She looked at the photograph near the door. Sandra, laughing at something just off camera, in a park somewhere, in what looked like early fall. Your wife? She asked. Yes, Colton said. She looks like she was fun. She was the funniest person I ever met. She also had absolutely no patience for people who judged things by how they looked on the outside. He said it without particular emphasis, just as a fact. Diana Whitmore heard it. The bell rang as she opened the door. She paused with one hand on the frame and the rain behind her, and the sound of the clocks around her. I'm in Portland until Monday morning, she said. If anything goes wrong with it before then, it won't, Colton said. She believed him. That was the thing she was least prepared for, that she believed him completely. She left. The shop settled back into its own rhythm. The rain kept falling. The clocks kept their conversation. Colton returned to his stool and his workbench, and the 1962 Omega that had been waiting patiently on the side tray. From the back corner, Benji spoke for the first time since Diana Whitmore had walked in. Dad, he said. Yeah, she thought the shop was bad. Colton said, fitting his loop back over his eye. But then she didn't. People change their minds sometimes, Colton said. Benji considered this. He picked up his pencil and looked at his drawing of Pinto. He had been worried about the ears, but they were actually pretty good. He'd gotten the way they drooped at the tips. He'd gotten the softness of them. Do you get mad? Benji asked. When people think that. Colton was quiet for a moment. The Omega's balance wheel caught the light. No, he said. How come? Because what people think when they walk in has nothing to do with what they'll think when they walk out, Colton said. And the only thing I'm in charge of is the part in the middle. Benji turned this over in the way he turned over all of his father's answers, slowly, seriously, as if it were a mechanism, with small parts that needed to be examined before it could be understood. What if they just leave? He asked. Without changing their mind? Then they leave, Colton said. I can't fix everything. Only the things that are actually broken. Benji looked at his drawing. He looked at the clocks on the walls. He looked at the framed photograph of his mother by the door, the way the Saturday light was hitting it just so, the way she was laughing at whatever she'd been looking at just off camera. He decided the ears were done. He turned the page to a fresh sheet and thought about what to draw next. On Monday morning, Diana Whitmore walked into the conference room of a glass and steel building in downtown Portland with a Patek Philippe on her wrist that was keeping perfect time. She shook hands with the right people. She said the right things. She signed the right documents and moved $38 million in the direction she had intended to move them. The watch did not hesitate. The calendar advanced cleanly. The minute hand swept through its arc without drag or faltering. She closed the deal. And later, in the town car on the way to the airport, she looked at the watch on her wrist and thought about a small shop on a rainy street, and a man who had corrected something she hadn't even known was wrong, and a little boy drawing in the corner who had watched everything without appearing to, and a photograph of a laughing woman hanging by the door where the light hit it right. She thought about what it meant to be good at something in a way that didn't need an audience. She thought about how rarely she encountered that, and how easily she might have walked past it. The car moved through the Portland rain toward the airport. Her flight was on time. She would be in San Francisco by noon. She kept the number for Farris & Son timepieces in her phone. She would call 6 weeks later with a question about a different watch, her grandmother's watch, a Longines from 1958 that had stopped decades ago, and that she had always told herself she would have looked at someday. Someday had arrived. Colton would answer on the second ring. He would ask her to describe what the watch looked like, what she knew about its history, whether the crown was still intact. He would listen without interruption. and he would tell her, gently and with complete confidence, exactly what it would take to bring it back. Some things that have stopped can be started again, if the right hands know where to find what's wrong. That was the only miracle involved. But it was, in the end, enough.